May 16th, 2009, a very angry 20-year-old from Louisiana had his very first professional MMA bout. A shaved head, a pair of blue shorts and a nasty left hand, Dustin Poirier made quick work of the man across from him, finishing the fight by KO in the very first round. Equipped with a killer instinct that would take him to the very top of the deepest division in the sport, and a pair of hands that would eventually see him snatch the title of best boxer in the UFC according to many fans, this was just the start of a very successful fighting career that's still ongoing to this day. If I wanted to introduce somebody to this sport, I would simply just log into BT Sport or Fight Pass and choose any Dustin Poirier fight. From his days at 145 pounds to his latest venture into the octagon, Dustin Poirier is fireworks every single time. In a sport where many shots aren't landed clean, where a punch can glance off of a fighter's temple and put them out, or maybe even a half-hearted overhand as a fighter is leaving the clinch, Poirier's boxing, however, is just a joy to watch. Clean, accurate and very dangerous. Just ask any fighter that steps into the cage with a diamond, it is usually one of the most damaging fights of their career. But time and time again, Dustin Poirier shows up, makes weight, strolls out to the boss by James Brown, banger, fixes his hair, pulls up his shorts and goes to war for as long as he needs to. On the mat, on the feet, 3 rounds, 5 rounds, a technical striking match or a brawl straight from your local boozer, Poirier is comfortable everywhere the fight goes. I wanted to cover his career in its entirety, spending a minute or so on each fight and really showing the evolution of Dustin. This sport is constantly evolving, and as many veterans struggle to adapt to the new way of things, there are a few fighters on the roster that are still getting better with every count. And as fans watch nervously waiting for the passing of the torch moment that the fighters we love start to lose, fighters like Dustin, Justin Gaethje and Beneil Dariush, just to name a few, have shown that they aren't just names for the young prospects to get under their belt, and they're gonna have to earn it if they're ever to get a win against them. Footage of Poirier's first 7 fights is scarce, but the record speaks for itself. All finishes, 3 submissions and 4 TKOs. A glimpse into the future of the Diamond, who rarely ever sees the scorecards. Debuting for World Extreme Cage Fighting and WEC 50, Dustin would go on to lose his debut in a major promotion in a 3-round fight that would see him taste defeat via the scorecards. After a grappling heavy bout in which much of the fight was spent with Dustin trying to submit Castillo from the bottom, he ultimately lost the rounds in the judges' eyes for it. Many fighters would fall at this first hurdle and potentially give up, say the dream isn't for them and maybe they can earn money elsewhere, but not the Diamond. As he would later show many times, even on the biggest stages, he evolves in between every single fight, using a loss as a learning point and coming back much stronger next time he laces up the 4-ounce gloves. Stomping back onto the blue mat with something to prove, Dustin came out swinging from the bell, landing big shots on Zach Mickelwright that sent him reeling into the fence, defenseless and eating heavy hooks from Poirier, the referee jumping in and stopping the fight 53 seconds into the very first round. When watching these fights, the first thing that jumps out right away is how much better Poirier's defense has gotten. He hasn't abandoned his style, and if you find yourself with your back against the fence as Mickelwright did in this bout, you can guarantee that the Diamond will swarm you with the very same violent offense, but now with effective head movement and deadly counter shots. If you were to ever find yourself hurt against the fence across from any fighter, you better pray it isn't Dustin Poirier. With featherweight king Jose Aldo pulling out of his scheduled bout against dangerous finisher Josh Grisby, which was actually supposed to be the first ever featherweight UFC title fight, Poirier was chosen as a short notice late replacement. Grisby was on a 10-fight winning streak, with 6 submissions and 3 TKOs, a prospect in his own right, and a big favourite against the young Poirier, who at this point had fewer fights in his entire career than Grisby had finishes. Poirier was a plus 195 underdog, with many fans expecting Grisby to make quick work of Dustin, and then reschedule the title fight with Jose Aldo. Unfortunately for him though, the newbie was much better than everybody was expecting, beat Grisby across all 3 rounds, earning a 30-27 victory across all cards. A brand new contract with the UFC, Dustin headed back into the octagon to face Jason Young in what would be a technical performance from Poirier, landing a few heavy strikes throughout the fight to stun Young, and also implementing cage wrestling and trips to win the rounds. One of the quote-unquote safer performances of Poirier's career, but none of his fights are without their highlights. Straight left hands, clean boxing and good footwork, Poirier picked up another W on his record and kept it moving. In his 3rd UFC fight in just 2011, Dustin was scheduled to face Pablo Garza on what would be a stacked card, with the likes of Cub Swanson, Ben Henderson, Clay Guida and of course the 2 giants in the main event, Velasquez vs Dos Santos. Dustin showed out with his first UFC finish, latching up a Darce choke in the 2nd round and forcing a tap from Garza, showing once again that he isn't just a Louisiana southpaw brawler with a left hand and a big mouth. In a performance that would go on to age extremely well, Dustin was scheduled to face a young Max Holloway making his UFC debut. And after scrambling on the mat and finding himself mounted by Poirier, Holloway attempted to kick off the cage and sweep the diamond, resulting in Dustin snatching a limb and sinking up a beautiful armbar. But as we now know, Max Holloway is never going to let you walk out of the cage with an easy finish, and after a few seconds of having his arm pulled and twisted, he managed to turn over onto his knees, temporarily escaping the armbar, but BJJ black belt Poirier quickly threw his legs up for a triangle, using it to sweep Holloway onto his back and mount him once again, this time having a mounted triangle position. Holloway's arm right there for the taking, ready to rip off and take back to Lafayette and throw on the barbecue. Holloway tapped and Dustin took home a very good win that night in Las Vegas. Naturally, Poirier was then given a chance to main event against UFC legend the Korean Zombie, who at the time was coming off of two solid finishes, a twister on Leonard Garcia and a KO against boxing specialist Mark Hominick, which worked out perfectly for him as he was about to go into training camp for Dustin Poirier. After a scrappy 4 rounds, both men were starting to tire, with Poirier throwing some jabs at the Zombie, trying to hopefully find the range, land a big shot and go home. But the Korean had other ideas, and as he leaped in with a beautiful right uppercut that sent Poirier crashing into the fence, TKZ threw a flying knee which just missed. Poirier wrapped his arm around the Zombie and attempted to take the fight to the ground, but was met with a hard sprawl, and the Zombie quickly sinked in a Darce choke on a very tired Poirier, finishing the fight in the 4th round and handing Dustin his very first loss in the UFC. Exactly 7 months later, Poirier returned to the cage with a vengeance. He had been out some time and spent 7 long months in the gym, and now it was time to show it. The man across from him was former TUF winner Jonathan Brookins, who was quickly dispatched with the very same technique Dustin had fallen victim to back in May, a beautiful Darce choke. After some effective cage wrestling from Poirier, he started to unload combinations on Brookins against the fence, a place we've already established you do not want to be against a diamond. After eating a few punches from Poirier, Brookins shot in for a lazy double leg and was instantly caught in the choke, almost mirroring the loss Dustin had suffered earlier in the year to the Korean Zombie. In another short notice replacement bout, Dustin was scheduled to face another UFC legend. Yo, come on. Can't be, yeah. I love you. In his second short notice replacement bout for the UFC, Dustin was scheduled to face another legend in Cub Swanson, a well-rounded fighter that could KO you on the feet just as fast as he could take you back and send you home with half of your purse. In what would go on to be a fight that would use all aspects of MMA, Dustin ultimately went on to lose the fight on the scorecards, with 2 judges giving Swanson a 30-27 card. Taking another 6 months to work on his game, the Diamond returned at UFC 164 against Eric Koch, putting on a beautiful display with his hands, dropping Koch with a huge right hook as he was exiting the pocket, which, honestly looking back at the replay, I have no idea how it didn't put Eric completely out cold. Standard Poirier, stinging left hand and good grappling awareness as Koch had his back at points, Poirier walked out of Wisconsin with a unanimous decision victory, bouncing back from the loss against Koch. Poirier was then scheduled to face featherweight Diego Brandao, who was coming in on a 3-fight winning streak. The bout was fought at a catch weight of 151.5 pounds as Brandao missed the 145 mark, and would go on to get TKO'd by Poirier when, you guessed it, a grappling exchange against the fence backfired on an already gassing Brandao, who had just been through a very bad weight cut and was already slowing down, with Poirier reversing the clinch against the fence and instead pushing Brandao against the cage. Dirty boxing, and catching Diego with a few solid shots to the body, Poirier showed great fight IQ by shooting in on his hips, dropping him to the mat and still throwing heavy strikes every time he could get a hand free. Diego stood up for the last time and was caught with his signature diamond left hand, with the ref jumping in to stop the fight after 20 seconds of unanswered ground and pound. Dustin takes home another win by finish. In another beautiful display of boxing, Poirier showed why standing with him is a risk for any fighter on the roster, as he caught Akira Korosani with a perfect straight left hand to lead uppercut 26 seconds into the second round. Korosani tried to circle out of danger straight into Poirier's power side and was caught with a flurry of body and head shots against the cage, crashing down into the mat as the fight was waved off. Dustin had then found himself in the path of one Conor McGregor, who, unfortunately for Dustin, was on a one-way trip to be the biggest thing to ever come out of mixed martial arts.
Dustin P-Head Poirier is next.
This fight build-up was the first time a light was properly shined on Dustin Poirier since his MMA documentary Fightville 3 years prior. A build-up of bad blood, near scuffles and viral moments that still circle the internet to this day. McGregor vs Poirier was set to be one of the more highly anticipated bouts in the featherweight rankings. Conor came out bladed, throwing spinning back kicks and not giving Dustin a second to breathe. Poirier went on to admit in the future that Conor was completely in his head, and it was no longer an MMA competition to Poirier but a fight, in which all IQ and game plan went out the door as soon as McGregor came spinning at him with Viking braids and screaming Irish fans in the Las Vegas crowd. Poirier was clipped with a perfectly timed left hook behind the guard and was left face down on the canvas less than 2 minutes into the fight. Dustin has spoken about this fight being a turning point for him many times, and this is essentially the last time we ever saw Dustin Poirier 1.0 in the cage.
You were a big 145. Like, how rough was that cut?
It was horrible. I would walk around 190.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
But you made it.
Made it.
How the fuck did you make that?
I don't know. Almost died. I feel like weigh-ins were kind of blurry. My memory's gone from weigh-ins. It's not good for you.
Okay, I just woke up. I'm gonna show you why I'm moving to lightweight. I'm in decent shape now, I would say.
Moving up to lightweight after the KO loss to McGregor, Dustin was paired up with Carlos Diego Ferreira, a man that is still racking up highlights in the UFC to this day. The bout was over quick, with Dustin landing early and often, dropping Carlos with a 1-1-2 combo and swarming in for the finish. Carlos reversed the position and actually managed to get a takedown on Poirier. Attempting to pass guard and throw up submissions, Poirier stayed safe and backed away, forcing the ref to stand Carlos up. 3 straight left hands, a right uppercut and some follow-up hammer fists, and the fight was over. Poirier with another TKO finish, but this time at 155 pounds. Another day, another first round TKO for the Diamond, who was scheduled to face Yancy Medeiros at another catchweight bout, this time at 159 pounds after Medeiros missed weight. The fight went very similar to a lot of DP's previous bouts. He lands early, defends takedowns or scrambles on the mat, swarms his opponent against the fence as they start to slow down, and then unleashes on them with combinations to the head and body until they either aren't moving anymore or the ref stops it. This one being the latter, as Poirier landed a liver kick that definitely made Medeiros taste his breakfast. Dustin squares up his hips, throws with bad intention, and the ref jumps in to stop the fight at 2:23 in the very first round. 6 months back in the gym, and the Diamond was set to face tough Irish fighter Joe Duffy, who is probably honestly one of the more underrated lightweights of the past 10 years. Poirier had to dig deep and really use the entirety of his game for this fight. Boxing, wrestling, ground and pound, elbows, and even had to survive a triangle choke that looked like it was getting pretty deep as the round came to a close. Dustin ultimately went on to win on the scorecards in what was one of the toughest fights of his career to date, although one of the judges giving a 30-26 scorecard definitely doesn't reflect that. Taking another 6 months between fights, Dustin sharpened his tools in Florida as he was scheduled to face UFC fan favourite and technical slick boxer Bobby King Green. And after some good leg kicks and dirty boxing, Poirier landed a clean left hand, only moments after Joe Rogan audibly says on commentary,
"Dustin's loading up here, Mike, and that's a mistake."
The left drops Green onto the canvas, semi-unconscious, a few finishing blows from Poirier and the ref jumps in. A win that looks pretty good even today, as Bobby Green is still a popular fighter among fans and consistently fights on the main card of pay-per-views. Poirier's second chance at main eventing goes similar to the first time, as he loses by brutal KO in the first round via the most inconsistent fighter on the roster, Michael Johnson, who on one night could probably beat John Jones by omoplata in the first 12 seconds, and on another night could get head kick KO'd by Hasbulla. There is no shame in losing to MJ, but this loss did halt Poirier's momentum at lightweight temporarily, although after this fight, Poirier's striking defense really did evolve, with this being his last TKO/KO loss until 2023. The debut of salon quality Poirier. Dustin Poirier 3.0, a mythical being that constantly is pulling on his shorts, fixing his hair and pointing at you whenever he lands a big shot. This is the man we have all come to love. And salon quality Poirier's first test was against the literal definition of UFC vet, Jim Miller. Miller utilised hard calf kicks throughout the fight, which severely impacted Poirier, something he has referenced in numerous interviews since, being one of the most painful post-fight recoveries he has ever gone through to this day.
I think it's okay, please.
I've had 40-something mixed martial arts fights, and I've never felt more pain during the act of fighting than when my leg got kicked by Jim Miller over and over again at that night in New York.
The calf kick, popularised by lightweight king Benson Henderson, is a technique Dustin would later use to his own advantage in one of the biggest fights in UFC history, but we'll get to that later. Dustin wins on the cards against Miller, with one judge even scoring the fight a draw. In the first of their 2 bouts, Poirier and Alvarez was booked for UFC 211, a fight that many expected would be a violent and bloody war, and that it was. Pretty much the whole fight is a highlight, with Poirier having his moments, unleashing combinations against Alvarez, who looked like he was honestly about to drop to his knees at any moment. Head kick, left hand, guillotine attempt, left hand, big right hook. Dustin tried to finish the underground king to no avail, and as Alvarez was tiring, he shot a double leg against Dustin that succeeded, and sat Poirier up against the cage. And as he tried to stand up, Alvarez landed 3 big illegal knees, with the fight being called off as a no contest. Given a chance to main event for the 3rd time, Poirier stood across the cage from UFC legend Anthony Showtime Pettis. Now this is 2017, and Poirier already has some of the biggest names in the division under his belt, with Pettis being another welcome addition to the resume. It was a decent fight but a very strange finish, with the official result being declared a TKO via body triangle. It seemed like Pettis had damaged a rib or something similar when caught in a tight body triangle and trying to turn to face Poirier. Nevertheless, another finish for DP. A classic barn burner in Arizona. I don't think there's many fights I've rewatched as much as this one. 4 rounds of non-stop striking magic. With Gaethje, who you could honestly call Gaethje 1.0 in his own right, was landing very, very hard calf kicks from a boxing range, something that fighters are still struggling to deal with when fighting Gaethje to this very day. Despite this, Dustin timed a left straight on Gaethje as he landed his trademark calf kick, rocking him badly, swarming the highlight against the fence and finishing him early in the 4th. A win that, again, like many on his resume, has aged very well, as Gaethje is still in the top 5 of the division and may even be fighting for a title again soon. After the war with Gaethje, there was talks from Alvarez on who the most violent man in the UFC was. Aside from belts and win streaks, who was the biggest dog in that cage? Who was the most willing to die in there, and would walk through a storm of bullets to get their hand raised? Poirier vs Alvarez 2 was scheduled for the next UFC on Fox card, and much like the first one, was an all-out war, with a strange finish. After mounting Dustin against the cage and throwing elbows, Eddie throws a 12-6, illegal in the rules of the UFC, so the ref stands the fighters up. And then shortly after, Dustin connects with a big knee that rocks Eddie, followed by a left hand that sends him reeling backwards to the one place you do not want to be against Poirier. The barrage of punches, kicks, knees and elbows Dustin throws in that last 30 seconds answered the most violent man question for us. And Eddie Alvarez, after eating 30 to 40 consecutive shots from Poirier in the finishing sequence of the fight, drops to his knees from a lethal elbow and the fight is waved off. No idea how Eddie wasn't out from some of those shots. Almost a year to the day after the war with Gaethje, Dustin was given the opportunity to fight Max Holloway in a rematch for the interim lightweight title, a moment that Dustin described as being paid in full. Max had been speedrunning a UFC Hall of Fame career himself, and after going on a 13-fight win streak that saw him capture the featherweight belt from GOAT Jose Aldo and defend it twice before moving up to 155 pounds to try and become double champ, the fight was an all-time great. With Dustin's power being the clear difference, Max was landing, but it just wasn't enough to hurt the diamond. Dustin wins on the cards and has his moment. Paid in full. Dustin then gets a chance to unify the belts and fight for the undisputed title against a man that really needs no introduction, Khabib Nurmagomedov. As far as Khabib fights go, Dustin performed well. He landed a few good punches on the eagle and even had a guillotine in at one point.
I finish him all the time in the gym. Mike Brown told me, don't jump another guillotine. I mean, we gave up position in the Khabib fight.
But by round 3, after grappling hard with the lightweight king, Dustin just didn't have the gas in the tank to fight off one last rear naked choke attempt, with Khabib finishing Poirier in the 3rd round, losing his first chance at undisputed gold. Another one for the record books, Dustin and Dan Hooker went to war. And I don't mean, yeah man, they went to war. I mean literally, these men probably would have received less damage jumping from a 3rd-story building. Dan Hooker has genuinely not looked the same since, and I'm sure this fight probably caused some irreversible damage to both men. Hooker wasn't a young prospect as such, but the narrative around this fight for some people was, it was the up-and-comer versus the veteran. Poirier was 8 years deep into his UFC career at this point, and had multiple title shots on his record, but Poirier just showed Hooker levels, and went home with a UD victory. Poirier vs McGregor 2, one of the most anticipated rematches in mixed martial arts history, and at the time, a lot of people were once again counting the diamond out. Well, he was KO'd inside 2 minutes last time and looked lost. Who says it doesn't happen again? Fair enough, good point. But as we've covered in this article many times, the man stood in front of Conor McGregor in 2021 is not the same angry young man that had fallen victim to the mental warfare from the Irishman. This time, Dustin was a seasoned, high-level, elite mixed martial artist that could honestly be considered one of the best lightweights on the planet, and McGregor was put on notice instantly. Everybody knows this one. The good old calf kick. The very same technique that Jim Miller had stung Poirier with and almost cost him another L on his record. He knew the pain of that next day, He knew how it felt to have to limp to the post-fight presser, and Poirier made Conor feel every single kick, with the Irishman almost bewildered on how to deal with it, often taking the kick full force, reaching down and trying to catch it and land a sloppy left hand. The fight snowballed downhill for McGregor, and before he knew it, guess where he found himself? His back against the cage, rocked from a big straight from Poirier, who was now closing in with vengeance in his eyes. And just for a few seconds, that young angry featherweight came out once again, as a big check right hook dropped McGregor against the cage, with Dustin leaning in and landing the kill shot to KO the Notorious One. Paid in full once again. Shortly after their rematch, Conor demanded the trilogy. The build up to their second match was actually respectful, almost too respectful at times, as both men promoted each other's side businesses, hugged, took pictures together. Conor said, "I respect this man" in the press conference about 13 times, and even after the fight, Dustin waited around for McGregor to come hobbling out of the dressing room, barely able to stand. They both shook hands and expressed their desire for a third one. Now fast forward to the trilogy fight and Conor's in full villain mode, insulting wives, throwing hot sauce bottles, threatening to try and commit homicide in the cage, and saying he was literally going to kill Poirier in his sleep. Just a bit of classic McGregor. The fight was just as unpredictable. As the first round was coming to a close, things were looking like they were about to start snowballing for McGregor, with Poirier having the grappling and control advantage and McGregor landing some decent strikes from the bottom. The two stand up, and after another exchange, Conor steps back on his already injured foot and completely snaps his shin in half. The fight is called off and is ruled a win for Poirier. It is yet to be seen if this was the end of the McGregor vs Poirier saga, as both seem keen for a fourth one down the line, but as for now, 2-1 Poirier. Fresh off of a newfound fame from the McGregor fights, Dustin was given another shot at undisputed gold against none other than Charles Oliveira at UFC 269 in what was an absolute banger and really isn't talked about enough. Dustin lands some heavy hands on Olives, dropping him to the mat multiple times throughout the fight, and overall generally winning the stand-up exchanges, despite Oliveira attempting to break Poirier's ribs with sharp knees to the body, many of which make me physically cringe when I watch them back. And then in the third round, after a striking exchange between the two, Charles enters the clinch and instantly takes Poirier's back against the cage, slowly climbing onto his back and eventually wrapping his legs around Poirier in a body triangle, latching up a standing rear naked choke. And after a few attempts to fight the hands from Dustin, Charles eventually sinks at him deep and forces the tap from Dustin, falling short once again in a chance to capture undisputed gold. A regular main eventer at this point, Dustin's return after the loss was against Iron Michael Pull Up Your Bootstraps Kid Chandler, in what was a war, with Chandler honestly coming on strong from the opening bell and landing some big shots on Dustin, backing him up to the fence with some wild looping combinations. But that's the problem, looping. Dustin is just too deep into this game to get KO'd by a winging right hook at this point, especially from an erratic Chandler. He kept his guard up and rolled with the punches, eventually catching Chandler with a perfectly timed counter punch of his own that sat Chandler down for a moment. The fight played out similar to the wars with Gaethje and Alvarez, with Poirier managing to actually get the back of Chandler in the third round after Chandler picked Poirier up and tried to slam him on his head. A scramble ensued. Dustin, for the second time in his career, gets finished with a technique and then comes out in his next fight and gets a finish with it himself. Third round rear naked choke submission for the diamond. Remember when Poirier rematched Alvarez and there were talks of who the most violent man in the UFC was? Well, they turned it into a belt. I won't go into the history of the BMF title, I'm sure we're all familiar, but Dustin Poirier and Justin Gaethje were scheduled to rematch at UFC 291 for it, an official medal for being recognised as a UFC gladiator. Not just a fighter that wants to lay and pray or jab and leg kick from the outside to win, but a fighter that leaves everything in the octagon, a fighter that doesn't plan for tomorrow. Not any man or woman on the roster can fight for this belt, and although it is a little bit silly, it does speak volumes to the wars that both Poirier and Gaethje have been in. The fight started in Dustin's favour, with him landing a big left straight in the first round that stunned Gaethje and put him on wobbly legs, but he braced and got through the round, landing his own strikes and mirroring Dustin Poirier's classic shift-through combo, which I'm not clever enough to fully explain. I will leave that to Jack Slack. But the second round was going much like the first, and then out of nowhere, Justin Gaethje throws a fucking head kick. He had tried it a couple of times throughout the first round, but this one really landed perfect. The cross head kick counter that Leon Edwards had slept Gaethje's longtime training partner and friend Kamaru Usman with just a year prior had actually just won him the BMF belt, and avenged his loss against Poirier. Amazing moment all around for Justin Gaethje. And just only minutes after he was knocked out cold, Dustin was on his feet again congratulating Gaethje, very excited to get back to the drawing board, back to his family, and move on to the next one. Writing this article, it's easy for me to see why Dustin's UFC 291 post-fight statements of "I've already won in life" ring true. This is a man that started like every other rough and ready MMA fighter of the early 2010s. a shaved head, some tattoos, a pair of shorts and a nasty side, and we have watched him blossom into a complete elite level mixed martial artist right in front of our very eyes. From losing his WEC debut, an event that would steer a lot of athletes away from the sport, to beating Grisby on a 10-fight winning streak, and then going on to beat some of the best lightweights in the sport, giving a good account of himself in every title fight he has ever been in, winning some and losing some, Dustin Poirier is a special breed of fighter that only come around once in a while, a true warrior, a man that is willing to give years of his life to entertain. It was a pleasure going through every fight of this man's career, and I just want to say, as a fan, as a student, and as a writer of this sport, Dustin, thank you for everything, and we cannot wait for the next one.